Hey, what's happening? It's Chris Redbeard Videos, and back with you for another edition of our tier lists here. And we're gonna do one interesting. It's not very unusual. I'm doing it based on Stacker. There's a website called Stacker. Yeah, Stacker.com, which does a lot of music and lists and whatnot. And they did a list of the best rock albums of the 1970s. Now, this is right up my alley, right down the old the old pipe there. A nice what seemed like a meatball pitch for me to just completely knock out of the park. But here's the problem: as much of a humongous 70s rock fan as I am, growing up on 70s rock the way that I did, this list not incredibly appealing to me. There's a million reasons why it's bugging me. Granted, every album on this list is at least good in my opinion from what I know of it. Some of them I am not incredibly familiar with, and I had to go back and familiarize myself with it or listen to it and find that one hit song that I knew or whatever. And in some cases, there wasn't even that. There wasn't even the one song that I was like, "Oh, that's the song that they're talking about." So, this list certainly comes off as a little too, I don't want to say highbrow because then that kind of insults me as a lowbrow person, but it does seem as if they're trying to be too smart for the room. They're trying to be too intellectual, and by omitting certain bands and artists, and I'll get to the end of the plot in terms of this storyline right away. There is not a Rush record, a Kiss record, or a Styx record on this entire list of the top 50 rock albums of the 70s. That's right. No 2112, no Destroyer, no Love Gun, no First Kiss album, no Dress to Kill, no Kiss Alive, no Grand Illusion, no Pieces of Eight. These albums are apparently not highbrow enough or not enough cork sniffing sound likability for these people. They're just entirely too cool for the room. And so when this happens and when I look at a list, I go, okay, maybe they're measuring this by some sort of metric that would somehow take out one of the top two selling albums of the 70s and Kiss Destroyer and Styx Grand Illusion, or one of the most iconic albums of the entire music subgenre of rock or genre of rock in Rush's 2112. But let's see what the measurement is. Stacker compiled data on the best rock albums of the 70s and listed the top 50 according to the best ever albums, which ranks albums according to their appearance and performance on 40,000 editorial and database charts. Examples are Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, Billboard, etc. The best ever album score is derived from a formula that weighs how many charts an album has appeared on and how high it reached on each of those charts and awards points accordingly. Basically, what this tells me is it's going to go by all the years of Rolling Stone and places like that, just maligning these great bands that were deemed arena rock or gimmicky rock, like Kiss, Rush, Styx. I think there's a Journey record on this list. I'm not 100% sure, but if not, Journey certainly got left off, I'm sure. Cheap Trick probably got left off, I'm sure. Like, these are bands that were considered AOR or arena rock or something like that. I may be proved wrong because I don't remember the exact list 100%, but I know for sure that Kiss, Rush, and Styx are not on this list, and that to me is a crime. You cannot have a 70s list with 4 or 5 albums from one artist, but not one from each of those 3 very, very important artists, especially Rush and Kiss. Styx is one of my favorite bands of all time, but I can make an argument that they weren't the most influential band out there, especially from the 70s. But Kiss and Rush most certainly are. The game, the way it's played today, is heavily influenced by Rush and Kiss, period. So there you go. And now with that, let's go to the big board. Okay. So here we are. Here's the big board. And this is my second tier list, so I'm still not an expert at this. You may or may not agree with me, and that's fine. I will tell you, different from Stacker, my metric is based on how much I like these albums and how much they influenced my musical tastes, okay? And whether or not I just think they're good. So this is 100% arbitrary and subjective on my part. There you go. But I do have to say that I understand that these things are subjective. So my rant may be misplaced at the beginning of this about how can a Rush or a Kiss or a Styx album not make this list. But when I see like 4 Pink Floyd albums, Nearly every Led Zeppelin album is on this list. Neil Young has 3 albums on. Neil Young! I understand Neil Young is good, but come on. Can we give some respect to like Rush or like Kiss, like the bands that have changed the game, like concerts that you know the way that they look today are because of those 2 bands. Any kind of technical rock music that's out there is because of Rush or Queen maybe. But like, come on, like give some respect where it's due. My God. Anyway, okay, I'm done with that. I'm not gonna say anything more about that. Let's start at number 50. So number 50 on the Stacker list is Carole King's Tapestry. Great album, phenomenal songs on this record. Great songwriter Carole King. You can't go wrong. Also with an album that has James Taylor and Joni Mitchell doing some backing vocals too. I mean, there's legends stacked on top of one another on this list. It won 4 Grammys. It's just an incredibly influential album that launched Carole King into a forever career. They even just, I think, made a Broadway musical about it not too long ago. She wrote You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, which is, an all-time great, and The Locomotion, and so on and so forth. So for me personally though, I mean, it's kind of folky and slow at times, and I'm not I love the song You're So Vain, but I also love the faster Pussycat version better than I do the Carole King version. So that'll explain why I would probably I'm going to put this album in the B tier, because I think it's a completely solid and wonderful record. There's nothing bad I can say about it. So I think B tier is where you reserve the albums that are good. I don't love every single song, but there's not one bad one on there. There's not one that I would go, that's a shit song. Now, Billy Joel, The Stranger, on the other hand, one of my all-time very, very favorite albums, and deserves all the praise that it gets. If it wasn't for 52nd Street by Billy Joel, this would probably be my favorite Billy Joel albums. You're talking about Only the Good Die Young, Moving Out, Anthony's song, Scenes from Italian Restaurants on here, She's Got a Way is on here. Billy Joel in his prime. There's really not very many better songwriters, especially at what he does specifically. Elton John would be close, but Elton John even trended more on a, technical, progressive side at times. I don't know, but it's different. Billy Joel's more straight up rock and roll, and The Stranger definitely exemplifies the beginning of that run. I think this was the first, I think 52nd Street came out before this, I believe. I'm not 100% sure now. I get those mixed up all the time. One was 77, one was 78. Anyway, The Stranger, that's an S tier album for me. It's one of my all-time favorites. I grew up listening to this in my house and with my dad singing it and stuff, and just an all-time fave. It's an all-time fave. I can't go wrong with this. Another completely wonderful album, Yes, Fragile. Yes, Fragile is again another one of my favorite albums. Yes falls into the list of my favorite bands, probably top 20 favorite bands. So, of course, I'm going to love this album from drop of the first note to the end of the last note. But if you look at what's on this album and what really launched, in my opinion, probably prog rock as a mainstay on rock radio, were songs like Roundabout and Long Distance Runaround, songs that I heard deep into my childhood. It was always on the local rock stations. Long Distance Runaround was such a humongous song for me to hear when I was a kid. And the funny story about Yes is that I didn't really become a fan of Yes until, I was in my early teens, probably like 12 years old, 11, 12 years old. And the day that happened was the day that I realized that Roundabout and Long Distance Runaround and Owner of a Lonely Heart, all the same band. Like, I didn't know, because they had this way of, even though John Anderson's got an incredibly distinguished voice that you can recognize from anywhere, something about the difference in those songs, even on the same album, Roundabout and Long Distance Runaround, there was something different about them enough that I couldn't put 2 and 2 together just by listening to them on regular rock radio. So it wasn't until I heard this album in its entirety later on in my childhood, like 11, 12 years old, that I was like, wow, that's the same band. I've always loved this band. And from that point forward, I fell in love with Yes, and I started checking out their stuff. And this was like their 4th album. Obviously they had some success with I've Seen All Good People and Starship Trooper before that. And even before that, you had Time in a Word was a minor hit, I think, in the UK. But like, I feel like Fragile is their benchmark album, their cornerstone album. And it's just an incredibly wonderful and progressive album, and just great on all fronts. And this is also an S tier album, in my opinion. Early prog rock at its best. Number 47 on this list is Let It Be by the Beatles. And granted, every Beatles album is classic. They're all wonderful. But I think we can all agree that Let It Be was clearly the final salvo from this band. Not that it was bad on any stretch. I mean, you have songs like Across the Universe, Get Back. I mean, I love this album from post to post. But when it comes to great Beatles albums, I know this has to be on there because I think it's technically, yes, it is technically the only Beatles album proper that's from the 70s. Of course, you have Hey Jude that came out after, but that was I don't know, it was like a weird compilation type of album, whereas Let It Be was the last official studio album of the Beatles. And I cannot, in good mind and good conscience, knowing how great the former Beatles albums were, put this in an S tier, but I can solidly put it in an A tier because it is just a wonderful album, like most of the Beatles records. It's simply a good one, and the song "Let It Be Alone" is an A tier song, so you can't really go wrong putting the Beatles' "Let It Be" in A tier, right? Okay. The Ramones, the first album by the Ramones. I mean, come on. It is widely considered the first real punk rock album that launched a massive movement that continues today, if you be honest about it. I mean, they've incorporated pop, so it's more of a pop punk thing, but the punk sound definitely is very much a regular part of rock music today. And it all started back with either the Ramones or the Sex Pistols. I choose to believe that the Ramones were more the torchbearer of punk rock, and that's not because I'm American and the Sex Pistols are British, but it's mostly because the Ramones stuck around and watched it flourish and matured with it and really carried that moniker. Whereas the Sex Pistols were like one and out, like boom. And sure, they might have been the more true punk band in terms of their attitude, but the music to me will forever be more the Ramones than the Sex Pistols. Although I do like me some Sex Pistols. So I will put the Ramones from a personal level though. I'm not a huge punk fan, so I can't kill the Ramones because I do like punk music, but as much as I think they're the torchbearer of punk rock and punk music, I can't make it one of my favorite albums of all time and put it in an S tier, and I can't rank it up there with the Beatles and Let It Be in an A tier. So I'm okay with putting it in a B tier. It's something that I'll listen to and spin on occasion, a lot like Carole King, but you won't catch me jamming out to the Ramones very often. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis comes in next, and this is the next step in what was the evolution of prog rock. This was a 1974 album. It came out around the same time as 2112, but Genesis was the more established outfit at that point. So obviously, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway got definitely more praise and record sales in its time, without question. And Genesis was amongst the biggest bands in the world at the time. So, of course, that album is going to get the Rolling Stones stamp of approval, even though I don't know for sure. I haven't read any Rolling Stones reviews on Genesis, but I'm willing to bet that they shit on them too. Like I have a sense that the Rolling Stone magazine was not a beacon for prog rock, as it were. But maybe they are a little too cork sniffery at times, and they do. Genesis fans tend to be very snooty. I think snooty's the word. I do love me some Genesis fans. I have some very good friends who are huge Genesis fans, but I have faced that fan base on multiple occasions regarding prog rock of today. And if you're talking about 70s prog rock and you're talking about Genesis prog rock, then they're all for it and they're all in it. But if you're talking about today, what's considered progressive metal and rock today, they're not with it. They don't like it that much. So with that being said, my personal opinion on Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is one of my favorite albums. I think it absolutely ranks up there with the Beatles' Let It Be. I'm going to put it, it's not one of my favorite all-time albums, but it's definitely a classic in my eyes. And I will certainly put it up there with the Beatles' Let It Be. And I'm having a hard time with these little thumbnails. So bear with me as I construct this list. Okay, there we go. All right, now. Here we go. Now it's low on the list. It's number 44. But On the Beach by Neil Young, I mean, I understand that record sales come into play here. And at the time, Neil Young was a giant star. He had his album Harvest before this. It was a very great and successful album, and I like Harvest. So if I was going to pick a Neil Young album to rank high, that would be the one I would put. But I don't know, like he's got a few guys from the band, right? They're the band, the band. Well, they're playing on this record, and that's cool. And again, some of the songs are great. I have no problem with Neil Young, but I don't love this album. And I don't know why it's on this list other than Neil Young was one of the biggest rock stars of the mid 70s. He was an emerging talent and one of those guys. He was a Vietnam protester, and he wrote a lot of protest music that people got behind, and hippie love and the whole bit. Neil Young was more of a personality, I think, than maybe Rush was at the time. Definitely not more than Kiss, though. So I would have occupied this. I would have been happy if 2112 would have shown up on this list right here at number 44, or if Kiss Destroyer would have shown up on this list right here, or even Styx Grand Illusion. I mean, come on. They got to be more. I don't hear about this Neil Young album very often. I hear about Harvest. I hear about Gold Rush. Like, these are albums that I hear about on the beach? Really? Anyway, for me, I'm going to put this on a D tier because I don't love Neil Young. And you're going to be hard-pressed to find any D or F tier albums on this list, I think, honestly. But this one I'm okay with putting in a D tier. One, because I'm angry that none of the other great albums that deserve to be on this list are on this list. So, yes, Neil Young is taking a pounding a little bit because of the wrongs of others, but so be it. Number 43 is Elton John, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and this is a great album. This is a great pop rock album. This has some progressive songs on it. Funeral for a Friend and Love Lies Bleeding are two of my favorite songs like ever. Obviously, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and all the other massive hits on this album. There's not much that can be said about this album because it's been overanalyzed. It's one of those albums that it's been overanalyzed. It's been talked to death, especially with Elton John's retirement this year. It's one of the all-time great albums. It's one of the all-time great cover arts. This goes in an S tier for me. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road is one of the most brilliantly written albums, ballsy with a double album as a studio album in the mid-70s. I mean, you got some guts there. I remember Kiss was talking about Kiss Alive 1 and putting out a double live album, at that time was not the best of the best moves, and somehow it panned out. And in this case, it did too for Mr. Elton John, Sir Elton John, in the S tier. Okay, so now here we go. The Stooges, Funhouse. Now, Iggy Pop shows up on this a few times, I guess for good reason. I don't love Iggy Pop. I don't get it. Like, I do get it. I'm sorry. Let me rephrase. I get it. I get the personality. I get the attitude. I get what he meant to punk and what he meant to hardcore music. And he still bears that torch today. So, good for him. Awesome. He put out an album last year that, to be honest, wasn't terrible. So, Iggy Pop, still, I don't know about relevant, but still putting out notable music. However, I don't love the Stooges. I like the raw sound and everything. But this second album actually went a little more rough than their debut album. But with the roughness and the attitude that came with this album, they actually went for a more produced sound on this record, and I think it hurts. I think it hurts the album a little bit. So with that being said, I think on record, the Stooges I can do without. I think live, the Stooges' performance is fantastic and worth watching on video, because I will give Iggy Pop credit where it's due. One of the best live performers I think there is in the game. But on the studio, it loses its luster a little bit. So I'm going to put this one also in a D tier. And again, I want to be very clear. These are personal choices, okay? It's not horrible music. I mean, granted, I would love to hear your opinions down below. Throw them in the comment section, because that's why I do this. I want to have this discussion with you. I want to know where you put the Stooges in your tier list. For me, they're in a D tier. CCO, Cosmos Factory. CCO is a wonderful band. Traveling band, Ramble Tamble, Looking Out My Back Door, Run Through the Jungle. This album is a tremendous one and deserves to be in a solid B tier. They weren't one of my personal favorites. I'll agree to that, and I'll say that. But at the same time, they're one of my wife's favorites. And over the past 2 or 3 years, I've listened to them way more. And I enjoy them way more. So I got to take this flannel off. It's getting warm in here. Now we're getting to sticking points now. Bruce Springsteen is on this list probably 3 or 4 times. I'll agree with anybody that Bruce Springsteen is an all-time rock and roll legend. Great. And even though I don't love his music personally, I will concede that he belongs on any type of list where there's the best rock acts of the 70s, even the 80s, period. He belongs on that list. But 3 times over Rush, Kiss, Styx, Journey, Cheap Trick, any of these bands? Really? 3 times. He's got 3 albums that are so much better than all those bands. Get the fuck out of here. It's ridiculous. And this one, Darkness on the Edge of Town. I mean, again, Bruce has got some great songs, but as a whole, have you ever listened to a whole Bruce Springsteen album? God, that's a lot of the same. That's a lot of and then saxophones everywhere. And then I went over and grabbed the mail. Like, come on, enough. Like, one album of this shit is great all time. Born to Run. That's it, man. You get all that you want out of Bruce Springsteen in Born to Run. It's not until his later days where he started changing shit up a bit. But for the most part, wherever the E Street Band is, there's that bells and saxophones and Bruce just telling you about his fucking day. That's all it is. So Bruce Springsteen, I can't put him in a D tier because I don't dislike. I mean, if I hear Bruce come on and I know the song, I'm doing at least my Bruce Springsteen impression while I'm singing it, okay? So at the very least, he's got my attention from that point of view. But I'm going to put it in a C tier because I find his music to be generally mediocre. Not mediocre from a sense that it's not technically great or it's not a good song. It's background fodder. It doesn't grab my attention at all, except for me to make a joke at his expense. That's the only time. So Bruce Springsteen, C tier, Darkness on the Edge of Town. The Doors present me with a little bit of a conundrum here. So again, another one of my wife's favorite bands. And oftentimes this is what happens, right? Oftentimes you will be set in your ways in terms of the things that you like. And you will grow up and then you'll meet someone new. And then you meet someone new and they open a door for you and they go, listen to this. And you go, huh, that's interesting. And that's kind of how my musical palette has developed over the years, is that whenever I meet new people, whatever they like, I will incorporate it into what I listen to and then pick out whether I like it or not. I don't automatically like it. I don't automatically go, well, my wife likes this, so I like this. But what happens is when somebody says this is my favorite band or one of my favorite bands, or they make me start collecting vinyl for that band, which is what happened here with The Doors, I started listening to it. And I've, of course, heard The Doors before. I like The Doors. I think The Doors are very good. However, would I rank one of their albums ahead of Rush and Kiss and Styx? Probably not on a personal level. However, LA Woman is one of the few exceptions that I would definitely put on a list, even if Rush did not make it, because The Doors are a fantastic band. LA Woman is an amazing album, just fantastic album on all fronts. And I think it's a solid B tier, beer tier. Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Talking of Jim Morrison, who drank himself to death.
We need a 2.5-hour movie about the Doors, folks. No, we don't. I can sum it up for you in 5 seconds, okay? I'm drunk, I'm nobody, I'm drunk, I'm famous, I'm drunk, I'm fucking dead. There's the whole movie, okay?
Solid B tier album, just because of its influence. But not only that, the music is tremendous. It's really, really good music. I can't really argue with the level of, I mean, I've gone as far as to have the conversation that the Doors might be considered early progressive music, like pre-progressive, because they were still in the psychedelic type rock of the late 60s into the early 70s. But like the stuff that they did with the keyboard and their time signatures and the length of their songs, they could definitely qualify as a band with at least progressive elements for sure. LA Woman, B tier. Coffee, A tier. It's not the best. I was out of peppermint mocha today. But hazelnut will do. I don't have much to say about Patti Smith's album Horses. She's a legend. She's a punk icon. She's a poet. She's just everything there was to the New York punk scene and was a staple at CBGB's. So I went and actually, I didn't know a lot about this album. I know a few songs, of course, because again, if you know music, you know Patti Smith. It's one of those things. But I went and listened back to this album. I actually like it. I'm not going to throw it up there against like, I'm not going to make the Rush, Kiss, Styx comparison because honestly, it's the only one of her albums that is on here and it belongs to be on here. It's a super iconic album of the 70s. In its time, it was very, very important to the music scene, especially to the New York punk scene. So Patti Smith Horses, I'm gonna throw in a C tier, not because I find it mid like Bruce Springsteen's output in general. I don't have a lot to say about it and I don't have a lot of opinion on it other than to say it's an important album. It's a good album. I recommend anyone who's into punk at all or any type of post-punk, pop-punk or anything like that. If you've never heard Patti Smith Horses before, you need to check it out. But I'm going to put it in a C tier for my own purposes. Okay, that's where it belongs for me. In my lexicon of music, it belongs in a C tier. Steely fucking Dan. Aja, number 37. This album, like, get the fuck out of here with the Steely Dan stuff. This yacht rock bullshit. I cannot. Oh, no. I cannot. And a lot of people love this shit, and great, that's good on you. I cannot. I've tried with the Steely Dan thing. They're great musicians. This is not talking about talent or ability. This is just talking about just direct music to me. It's just, I don't know, man. If I want to go to sleep like fairly immediately, Steely Dan's a way to go. And I guess there's something to be said about music that'll put your ass right to sleep. But for me, for this purpose, this might be one of the few F tier albums. Steely Dan, Aja. I cannot. I don't know, man. Like, it's not that I'm against yacht rocky type of shit either, because I have no problem with like Michael McDonald.
If you don't take this Michael McDonald DVD that you've been playing for 2 years straight off, I'm going to kill everyone in the store and put a bullet in my brain.
And like the Doobie Brothers and stuff like that. I think that shit's kind of dope at times.
If I hear Yamo Be There one more time, I'm going to Yamo burn this place to the ground.
But like Steely Dan just gets too in the weeds for me. I cannot. I just can't. I've tried. I've honestly tried. Steely Dan fans, don't come after me, even though I know you're probably some of the most chill people on the planet Earth. How do you do? Do not come after me. Okay, I'm not shitting on the band. The band's very talented, but keep it off my stereo. Another one, Van Morrison, Moondance. Okay, awesome artist. Great hits on this album. Moondance, Into the Mystic, Crazy Love Caravan. All great. And you know what? I don't know. Van Morrison, I have nothing bad to say. I'm not going to put this in an F tier like Steely Dan, because I do have bad things to say about Steely Dan, because fuck that shit. I'm over it. And nobody jams Van Morrison down my throat the way that they do Steely fucking Dan. I can't get rid of Steely Dan. But Van Morrison, it's not nearly as bad. I don't know. I'll put this in a D tier because I pay no mind to it. It doesn't bother me. I don't like it either. It's more yacht rock bullshit that I can't get behind. And again, I feel weird even saying this because I don't hate yacht rock, but Van Morrison and Steely Dan, I can do without. So Led Zeppelin appears on this list like 9 times. So I'm not going to go on and on about Led Zeppelin, but I will say that out of the Led Zeppelin albums that are on this list, Led Zeppelin 3 being ranked the lowest is a little surprising to me, because it's probably my favorite Led Zeppelin album as a whole. Immigrant Song, Celebration Day, Since I've Been Loving You, Gallows Pole, Brawny or Stomp. I mean, this is a great record. I don't know if I could put it ahead of Led Zeppelin 2, honestly. It's pretty damn close though, and this being the lowest ranked Led Zeppelin album at number 35 is quite surprising to me. Yeah, no, it makes even less sense considering Led Zeppelin 2 is not even on this list because it came out before 1970. So, yeah, I'm interested to see. I know other albums are on this list up ahead of it, but, you know. So Led Zeppelin 3, I'm going to put this as an S tier band, S tier album. There's one other Zeppelin album that'll probably make this S tier as well. But as of right now, it's just Zepp 3. So this one's interesting because Quadrophenia by The Who is a rock opera similar to Tommy. So when comparing this to other rock operas, there's a lot of shit out there, okay? There's a lot of shitty attempts at concept albums and rock operas. Quadrophenia is a good album. It's solid, and it's really good. But at the same time, I have to compare Quadrophenia to its predecessor, which is Tommy. And when compared to Tommy, in my opinion, Quadrophenia falls mightily. It's not even close. Tommy is such a better record than Quadrophenia, in my opinion, that, I don't know, I think it knocks Quadrophenia down a peg or two. So I'm going to put Quadrophenia in a C tier because I just don't get, I remember very distinctly, I think it was the late 80s or the early 90s, when The Who went on tour for this album again. Like, and they're doing Quadrophenia in its entirety, and it was a big production. And that's when I first heard this album, because I didn't know, all right? Because again, you got to remember, when I grew up in the 80s, we didn't have streaming or YouTube. So you either listened to what your family listened to, and my dad was big Billy Joel, Frankie Valli, Neil Diamond, old 60s, 70s, not rock. He didn't get into hard rock, Doobie Brothers, Little River Band, stuff like that. That was his thing. And then he ventured onto country later. My brother, though, was into the hard rock, heavy metal, but he didn't get into The Who. He was Rush and Kiss and little AC/DC, Styx, hair metal. That was his deal. So that's where my roots came from. So I didn't listen to The Who. I only heard what was on the radio. And none of the Quadrophenia songs really made it onto the radio. That's number one. Number two, Tommy had some hits on it, so I heard Pinball Wizard and things like that. And then three, as I got older and understand music better, I just think Tommy's a better album. So Quadrophenia is a mid album. You know, it's not bad. I think it's really good. It's well constructed in terms of rock operas go. It's amongst the best. But that bar is kind of low when you compare it to other rock operas. So Tommy would be an A-tier band, A-tier album, whereas Quadrophenia is a C. That is my explanation, and I'm sticking to it. King Crimson Red. So King Crimson has one of the largest outputs of any band in the history of music. And I'm glad that they only picked one album. And obviously you couldn't pick Court of the Crimson King because that's from like the 60s. So out of all of these albums, I could have argued maybe to pick another King Crimson album from the time period, like Lark's Tongues and Aspic, or actually Red was the last album of the 70s. I mean, Lizard was good too. But yeah, Red seems to have the most consistent, I mean, it's weird in its own right, but like the songs themselves are just all time. Fallen Angel is great. One More Red Nightmare is classic. Starless is amazing. I mean, every song on this album is over 6 minutes long. So it's a listen. It's a commitment. Let's just say that. But it's a great album. It's a superb prog rock avant-garde record that if you're into prog rock or if you're heading into prog rock, this would be a good place to listen if you want to really expand the horizons, if you want to get out of the typical Genesis, yes, even Rush, even Rush is typical compared to King Crimson. King Crimson stretched the boundaries almost to a Zappa level. Okay, so there you go, King Crimson. That's a B-tier album. I mean, an A-tier album, sorry. So sometimes I feel like people on this list that do lists like this at all, especially for magazines, these highfalutin, snooty type, sometimes they grab something just because it'll make people like me go, what the fuck did you just do? Why is Rush, Kiss, Journey, and Styx, amongst other bands, not on this list, but Can is, okay? Like, again, I don't want to shit on a band. Can is fine. I've listened to Can. They're cool, okay? Tago Mago is the album in question, or Tago Mago. I don't know how you would say it. I'm not German. But this is an experimental group on the level of King Crimson, which is great. I'm glad that we're branching out and not picking some random typical rock music from Germany. But like, why is this on this list? And Rush and Kiss are not. Why? Okay, that's the end of that. With that being said, okay, this album is okay. I can't pan it completely. I cannot. I wanted to. I really did. Because when I saw it on this list and I was like, mother, like I was just, I was so mad that Rush and or Kiss and or Cheap Trick and or like any of the bands that I've ranted about this whole fucking time, they're not on this list, but Can is. I don't understand how they can do that. So I'm going to stick this in a C tier just because it's mediocre enough that it really didn't make a difference in the lexicon of American music, I don't think. And if it did, it's got a blind spot on me. So I'm okay with that. And I've listened to the album. I've heard it in the past. I listened to it again when researching this tier list. And I have to say, how does it make it above 2112? I just don't get it. Number 31 is Metal by Pink Floyd. And it has a 23-minute track on it, Echoes, which somehow Pink Floyd still, they still straddle the line of prog rock and psychedelic rock. I think they're one and the same. I have no problem putting Pink Floyd in the prog rock subgenre. However, then that leads to them being automatically named the number one prog rock band of all time because of albums like The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon and so on. And that's fine, I guess. But I have a hard time seeing them as the pinnacle of prog rock. So I myself wrestle with the Pink Floyd categorization as it is. However, Metal was definitely the first album to put Pink Floyd in that progressive subgenre area. It's definitely the one that garnered them the, wow, this band's really fucking weird, and experimental realm, let's say that. So Pink Floyd Metal has, like I said, the song Echoes, which is 23 minutes long. The rest of the songs on this album are not ones to really write home about, but the experimental nature of the songs is something to be said. Fearless is a great song, but Echoes is the show here. It's the last song on the album. It's 23 minutes long, and it is the whole effing show. I mean, that's what you show up for when you're doing this. So I would put Pink Floyd's Metal, I would say it's a B tier album just because of how important it is, not only to my ears and to my listening, but to prog rock and prog metal as a whole. It definitely launched some ships. Came out in 1970, so I'm sorry, 1971. So it was early on. It was around the time of King Crimson. It was around the time of Yes and Genesis when all those bands were doing those things. So it was a remarkable thing. Echoes doing the entire side of the record thing, which is something Rush did later on. So number 30, again, it goes with that Beatles thing. There comes a point where you're gonna just accept certain artists into a list like this just because they're who they are. So John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band by John Lennon is one of those. And again, I can't help but automatically assume that this made this list simply because the name is John Lennon. I've listened to this album on multiple occasions. It's not one of my favorites. I don't like John Lennon stuff, or Paul McCartney's for that matter, solo, nearly as much as I like the Beatles. The Lennon Plastic Ono Band album, to me, I don't know, again, it's a C tier album. I have a hard time panning it or shitting on it because it does have a fair amount of good on it. And of course, it's John Lennon. The guy writes songs. That's what he does. Or that's what he used to do. But with that being said, it's not something I would ever listen to very often. It's very rare that I'm popping on my John Lennon, the Lennon Band, Plastic Ono Band record on my turntable or in my ears on streaming. It's not often that happens. So I don't find a lot of it that I love, and I don't find a lot of it that I hate either. So I think it's a solid C tier record. As I said before about Iggy Pop, Lou Reed is a massively important artist when it comes to 70s rock, specifically when it came to the progression of punk music and hardcore music and things of that nature. Lou Reed was super, super important, and the album Transformer being produced by David Bowie and Mick Ronson and having songs on it like Walking on the Wild Side, and I don't know, Wagon Wheel was good, and I'm So Free, Goodnight Ladies, like these are great songs. And it's one of those artists like Lou Reed that I don't like until I started doing this list. I didn't realize how much I liked Lou Reed. Not one of my all-time favorite artists, but I always assumed he was a lot like Iggy Pop. A lot of like talking and just, but Lou Reed is a supreme songwriter. Like he's a fantastic songwriter. Not to shit on Iggy Pop. I'm just saying the difference that I found is that I prefer the songwriting style of Lou Reed over that of an Iggy Pop, and to me they're similar personalities, not personalities. They're similar. They just somehow they got melded in my brain. Like somehow Lou Reed and Iggy Pop got melded in my brain. Maybe it's because they look similar on some level. I have no idea, but I would put this Lou Reed record in a B tier. I think it's got enough good songs on it. I don't love every song. It definitely doesn't rank in the A or S tier in my book, but it definitely is a good enough album that I wouldn't put it in the C Bruce Springsteen tier, or album that I don't listen to a lot or haven't had a need to listen to a lot. So I would put it above that. So that's why it's in a B tier. Number 28, what do I do with the Sex Pistols? Never mind the bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols. Like, what do I do with this one? Because on one end, it's revolutionary music, right? It even took what the Ramones did 2 years earlier and stepped it up a notch, picked it up a notch. They stepped up the attitude, and they stepped up the rawness and the anger even to a whole different level. Whereas the Ramones weren't really angry. The Ramones were more just talking about their day and talking about their life and things that they're experiencing. Whereas the Sex Pistols did the same, but they did it in a much more angrier way, screamier way. So I have to put this in an A tier. It's got to rank. I got to put it ahead of the Ramones. I hate to say that because I know that I said before that I prefer the Ramones, but as a one-off album, the Sex Pistols is a better album. It's just a better record than the first Ramones album. That's all. And I have to agree with that, unfortunately, as much as I want to disagree with Stacker here. George Harrison. one of the few Beatles who put out solo albums that I actually thoroughly enjoyed. All Things Must Pass, coming in at number 27, a 1970 release. It's a wonderful, wonderful album, aided by the great Bob Dylan, who, again, I'm not a huge Bob Dylan fan, but the guy's a great songwriter. So when he collaborates with someone else, and I don't know if he got any actual writing credits on this album, but he definitely befriended George Harrison and influenced his songwriting for sure. So you can hear it too. You can hear it on this album. It makes a huge difference in what was happening. So George Harrison's All Things Must Pass. I'm going to put this in a B tier though. So I'm going to put Harrison in a B tier. And to me, I had to rank it higher than the Plastic Ono Band. So far I've been consistent. Put Harrison above John Lennon. I'm not sure if there's a McCartney album on here. I don't recall seeing one. So maybe there isn't. There might be a Wings album though. I like Wings. So number 26, David Bowie, Station to Station. Now, Station to Station. So even though David Bowie himself said that making this album was the darkest days of his life, even music critics, according to this article, even music critics who hated this record, Station to Station by David Bowie, said that he had created a masterpiece, and I tend to agree. David Bowie, Station to Station, is an all-time rock masterpiece without question. You can't go wrong with this record. It's got a 10-minute song on it. David Bowie did some wild shit back then. Between Ziggy Stardust and albums like this, Golden Years, Word on a Wing, the title track, Wild as the Wind. This is a great record if you haven't heard Station to Station. And it's not one of the ones that a lot of people talk about, Station to Station. It's usually Ziggy Stardust or Let's Dance or even Low is another one that people talk about a lot. Station to Station doesn't seem to be one that I hear about a lot. So that to me is the mark of an even better album, because if it can still remain so amazing that it's on lists like this, and it's not one that people talk about a lot, I mean, that to me, that's something. Oh, the second Neil Young sighting. How is Kansas not on this list too? And it's Harvest. And this one I can't argue with. Heart of Gold, Old Man. You can't argue with Neil Young Harvest, really. I mean, I can argue that Neil Young should not be on this list 3 or 4 times. That is a given to me. I think that's almost a given. But I can't argue with the album Harvest being on this list. This is a fantastic album. Now, am I going to put it in an A tier? No. Why? Because Neil Young is nowhere near one of my favorite artists, nor is this album one of my favorite albums. However, out of all the Neil Young albums, I have to put this in a B tier, because out of all the Neil Young albums, this is probably the best one. So, Harvest, although I know there's 1 or 2 that ranked above this on this list, I have to say that Harvest is probably the best. I may change my mind, but I'm pretty sure that's it.